Thank you for allowing me to present. My name is Nisha Arya, and I'm here to present the research conducted at the University of Pennsylvania. We have no disclosures. Urinary urgency is the hallmark symptom of overactive bladder that affects 275 million women worldwide. Prior research using bold fMRI has qualitatively described differences in brain activity in women with overactive bladder. Arterial spin labeling is a newer fMRI technique that can quantitatively measure cerebral blood flow in milliliters per 100 grams per minute. This is calculated from the perfusion image, which is obtained from the difference between the tagged image and the control image. Our aim was to quantitatively describe brain activity during urinary urgency in women with overactive bladder as compared to controls. Our hypothesis was that urinary urgency is associated with an increase in CBF in select regions of interest in the brains of women with overactive bladder. We compared 12 cases and 10 controls. We obtained the low urgency scan after the subject urinated and the high urgency scan after the subject drank water. This slide shows the difference in cerebral blood flow between cases and controls. Regions of increased cerebral blood flow are in yellow. In controls, there was no significant difference in cerebral blood flow between the high and low urgency states. In the OAB group, we can see there was an increase in cerebral blood flow in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. This slide shows the cerebral blood flow for several regions of interest for cases and controls. Cerebral blood flow in the low urgency state is in blue. Cerebral blood flow in the high urgency state is in red. In the control group, we can see that there is no real difference in blood flow between the high and low urgency states. However, in the overactive bladder group, we can see that there's a 10 to 14% increase in cerebral blood flow from the high to low urgency states, as shown by the lines being more spread out. This table shows within group and between group differences in cerebral blood flow in select regions of interest. Within each group, the first column shows the change in cerebral blood flow in milliliters per 100 grams per minute. The second column shows percent change. In the OAB group, we can see cerebral blood flow was significantly higher in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. We can see that in the controls, the change in CBF in the anterior cingulate cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the thalamus was significantly greater in women with overactive bladder than in controls. So, our conclusions are that urinary urgency is associated with a 10 to 14% increase in cerebral blood flow in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. Urinary urgency in women with overactive bladder likely represents the abnormal processing of sensory signals in regions of the brain associated with the emotional response to discomfort in the limbic cortex, and that this response can be measured quantitatively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of questions.
Simple answer questions. But it's cause or consequence of overactive bladder, the increase of...
Can you say that again?
The increase of blood cerebral artery is cause or a consequence of the overactive bladder?
Right. This is the response of urgency that they experienced after they either drank water or urinated. So this should be the consequence, the response.
Thank you, well done. Lovely images, by the way. I just wondered, could you tell us more what you think about in terms of where your research is going to go in the future in terms of clinical application?
Great. Yeah, so in the future, our findings show that cerebral blood flow is potentially an objective biomarker for measuring the diagnosis of overactive bladder. So, however, in most cases right now, overactive bladder is diagnosed based on patient-reported symptoms, but cerebral blood flow could be used for the diagnosis of complex cases where, let's say there are overlapping symptoms of overactive bladder and interstitial cystitis, which can be harder to report. Our findings will be most useful in developing new treatments for overactive bladder that can target the increased, or the areas that have increased cerebral blood flow, which medication or even meditation could address.
Interesting, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Bill Gibson, University of Alberta. I was wondering, how do you know your patients had urgency rather than urge?
Oh, so we, before we had them go into the scanner, they reported using a visual analog scale, their urgency. For the low urgency, it was 3, it was from 1 to 10, so it was 3 or under, and then for high urgency, it was 7 or above.
So was that urgency or strong desire to avoid because they're different?
We reported them as the same because the hallmark symptom of overactive bladder is urgency. So when they felt that they needed the urge to go, when they had the threatened loss of urine, then they went to the scanner.
In your over here.
Oh.
Hi. In your figure, it seemed in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that there was a drop in cerebral blood flow. In the it was a significant difference, but it seemed that the blood flow was greater in the controls than in the OAB group.
Right.
So how would you explain that?
Yeah. So in that table, it was actually showing the change in cerebral blood flow from the low urgency to the high urgency scans. So that table was actually showing that the cases had a higher change in cerebral blood flow than the controls, even if it was going down.
Short question.
All right, perhaps a technical question. So what kind of MRI scanner did you do it on? I mean, what vendor? And then how long did the scans take? And what about motion between the scans during that time?
Okay, so the scans were conducted on an MRI scanner, just using the way we analyzed it.
Which one? GE, Siemens, Philips, Toshiba?
I think it was GE.
Okay.
And then to account for stillness and or motion, we made sure that the patients were still throughout, and I think we repeated the scans.
I mean, did you quantify motion? And how long did the scan take?
The scan was 10 minutes for the low and high urgency scan. And for motion, I think our results were pretty clear, but I don't think we made any corrections for motion.
All right, good, thank you.
Okay.
Excellent,
We have to go
very
on.
well done. You answered
Thank you.
questions extremely well.
Thank
well
you.
done.